Mazda 6 was equipped with 3 petrol 4s. All atmospheric, no turbines. The motors are extremely simple and resourceful. The 1.8 and 2.0 engines are generally borrowed from the first generation Mazda 6. The 2.5-liter grew from the old 2.3-liter engine. If you don't skimp on engine oil, these engines will run 500,000 kilometers without any problems. If you save money, oil will appear due to stuck piston rings, and the engine may turn the liners. All these engines periodically flow oil through the valve cover gasket, L5011023O, spark plug well seals and, except for the 1.8 engine, through the phase shifter solenoid seal. Less commonly, oil leaks occur along the heat exchanger gasket above the oil filter. Engine support cushions also periodically fail, especially the right hydraulic one. Oil may simply leak out of it, but more often vibrations and shocks simply appear in the body when changing gears or when pressing/releasing the accelerator pedal. When worn, the light alloy upper bracket literally rests on the rubber pad of the support. The original pillow, GS1G39060G, will cost $130. Once every 50,000 kilometers, you will have to clean the absolute air pressure sensors and the flow meter. These means of measuring engine load are found on all gasoline 4s for the Mazda 6. Along with them, the throttle must also be cleaned. If they become dirty too quickly and heavily, this indicates a clogged crankcase ventilation system. The intake manifolds of these engines have swirl flaps, the axis of which separates the seats. Then the axle begins to vibrate and rustle. And if the control valve for the swirl flap actuator fails, they will stop opening and the motor will choke. 2 and 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engines are equipped with a system for changing the length of the intake manifold, in which over time the damper drive rod breaks off or the actuator control valve malfunctions. In this case, engine output will also decrease. The timing drive of these motors uses leaf chains that last more than 200,000 kilometers. Note that if the owner brings these engines to the point of oil consumption, then it makes sense to make a light overhaul with the replacement of piston rings and the obligatory measurement of the cylinders. Such an engine upgrade will cost about $700. Sometimes decarbonizing the engine can help. Sometimes Mazda 6s with turbodiesels of their own production are on sale. As a rule, these are station wagons imported from Europe. The 2-liter engine was inherited from the first generation 6. Since 2010 it was replaced with a 2.2-liter engine. Both turbodiesels are not bad, but require solving the issue of the particulate filter and careful handling of the Denso fuel system. We have detailed reviews for both of these motors. Mazda 6 with a 1.8-liter engine was equipped with a trouble-free 5-speed gearbox. Manual transmission, the rest of the engines are paired with a 6-speed. Mechanics. We advise you to monitor the oil level in this gearbox, because it flows quite actively through the seals. As a result, the synchronizers may crackle. 2-pedal Mazda 6s are equipped with 5-speed steering. Automatic FNR5, FS5AL, which was created by Ford engineers. This transmission came to the second generation 6 without childhood illnesses. Where the support in the rear cover for the reverse drum rarely occurred, and the brake band became more durable. This automatic lasts more than 200,000 kilometers, but to make it last longer, simply update the transmission fluid in it every 50,000 kilometers, preferably by removing the pan and replacing the filter. A Mazda 6 with automatic transmission fluid often leaks into the engine cooling system. The automatic cooling radiator is built into the lower part of the main radiator and is immersed in a bath of antifreeze. The radiator itself is connected to the tubes with threaded fittings. The fittings flow through the threads on the radiator side, after which the transmission fluid is almost freely poured into the main radiator with antifreeze. If one of the fittings comes off from the radiator housing, then antifreeze can get into the automatic transmission. In this case, the liquid level in the expansion tank will be, as they say, under the cap and with emulsion. Kicks and twitches will appear in the operation of the transmission, and then errors will appear. As a result, you will have to change the main radiator, flush the cooling system, automatic transmission. If the automatic machine gets seriously drunk with antifreeze, then all the clutches will have to be changed. The friction material swells from glycol. A more reliable way to solve the problem is to install a separate radiator for the automatic transmission, cooled by air. When purchasing and operating a Mazda 6, you need to pay attention to the health of the steering rack. The symptoms here are clear. The steering wheel rotates with enormous force. If you are already the owner of a Mazda 6, constantly monitor the condition of the tie rod boots. It is because of holes, cracks or poor compression that the electric steering rack of this car dies. All weak points make themselves felt in wet weather. Here the electric motor is located around the rack itself, which means that through the holes in the boots, especially in the left boot, Water has direct access to the electric motor and its bearing. If the gain is completely gone, then corrosion has killed and jammed the rotor bearing. If the boost only works in one direction, then the water has damaged the stator. Sometimes the electric booster turns off periodically, but this is only the beginning of his end. Mazda 6 steering racks are being successfully restored today. The bearing is on sale, and you can also buy a used rack. There is another problem with the steering rack of the Mazda 6. Its symptoms are as follows. The power steering works normally, but when driving the car constantly pulls to the right. Moreover, the drift occurs due to the steering wheel deflection. Either the performance of the electric amplifier decreases or the gain becomes uneven when turning left or right. Sometimes the gear independently turns the steering wheel all the way to the right. All this indicates a problem with the torque sensor. It is installed above the rack on the steering shaft. The problem is the appearance of cracks in the torque sensor guide sleeve. Impacts from potholes break the plastic holder of the bushing, and over time it simply wears out. You can calibrate the steering rack, the symptoms will disappear, but will reappear pretty soon. In this case, you will have to install a non-original repair kit, which will cost $480. According to the original, the torque sensor is not sold separately from the steering rack. Non-original bushings also appeared on sale for $60. And it seems, with their help you can troubleshoot problems with the steering rack. To replace the bushing you will have to dismantle the rail. At the front the Mazda 6 suspension has 2 wishbones on each wheel. The ball joint of the lower arm was remembered by both the owners and the serviceman as a creaking sound that appeared already after a mileage of 50,000 kilometers. This creaking does not indicate wear on the ball. To extend its life, craftsmen drilled a hole under the ball joint and screwed in a grease fitting, i.e. valve for supplying grease. Balls lubricated and maintained in this way serve for a long time and silently. New control arms on the Mazda 6 are expensive. The lower one is more than $400. The upper one is about $130. Silent blocks for them can be purchased separately only from non-original manufacturers, but in general the front suspension lasts a very long time. The stabilizer struts are ready to travel more than 100,000 kilometers, but the life of the bushings is a little more modest. The rear 3-lever will not require repairs up to 150,000 kilometers. Here the silent blocks of the trailing arms burst first. There are no original silent blocks separately from the levers, but the lever itself can be purchased for $80. The front wheel bearings of the Mazda 6 were changed under warranty because they turned out to be weak. If you have to change them, keep in mind that they are exactly the same in size as on the first generation Mazda 6. But they contain a magnetic tape, which is used to read the speed of the ABS sensors. This means that the wheel bearings must be installed correctly, with a side with the plastic boot of the magnetic tape facing outward. Otherwise, the ABS error will light up. Brake calipers, especially the rear ones, on many cars suffer from moisture getting under the guide boots. We advise you to inspect them at every maintenance, so as not to run into problems with rebuilding the calipers and installing a repair kit. This first generation Mazda 6 has the ability to recycle itself. It rusts very quickly, even faster and louder than an Opel. But the second generation 6 escaped the red-haired shame of its predecessor. The anti-corrosion resistance of the body is very decent. There is no need to worry about the appearance and intensive development of corrosion spots. But it's still worth a close inspection of the body. If there is a suspicious amount of rust on the external and internal panels, then most likely this is a sign of an accident. Problems with the headlight lens corrector often appear on the Mazda 6. In this case, the AFS error lights up on the instrument panel and, naturally, the vertical angle of the headlights is not automatically adjusted. The problem is that the body position sensors have failed or their rods have been broken. There are 2 body position sensors, front and rear. They are mounted on subframes and connected to suspension arms. Today there are a lot of offers on sale, both of non-original steel rods instead of the original plastic ones, and of the sensors themselves. Note that the body position sensor is easy to check. Its connector has 3 contacts. Accordingly, we apply a reference voltage of 5 volts to the left pin, and connect the right one to minus. We connect the multimeter to the minus of the source and to the central pin. When the rod rotates, the signal voltage should vary from 0.5 to 4.5 volts. On pre-restyling Mazda 6 second generation, fog lamp glasses are excellent targets for stones. Fog lights break or get badly scratched. New fog lights, GS1D51690B, cost $100. Non-original or used ones are about half that price. You can buy non-original glass shades, $7 each, and re-glue them. Mazda 6 taillights begin to sweat from the inside over time. This is a sign that the foam seals behind them are already tired and are leaking water, which can also drain into the trunk. Gaskets have not been sold for a long time, there are no substitutes. Therefore, you will either have to make them yourself or build up old ones with silicone. The second generation Mazda 6, like its predecessor, can surprise you with the sound of the waves. This will be the noise from the water splashing in the body sills. Water gets there through drains from above and in front past the fender liners, but the water must drain from the thresholds through several drainage holes. If it does not drain, then the drains are clogged with debris. You will need to break through the blockages. From the thresholds through the technological holes, water can get into the cabin under the carpet and soak the fuse box, which is located at the bottom of the front left pillar. It happens that due to moisture and corrosion, electronic errors appear in the unit. For example, the stabilization system may turn off. Water can also get into the cabin through the seals of the technological holes in the engine panel, through which the electrical wiring harnesses are pulled. But if water appears in the trunk underground, then you will have to remove the bumper and change the white clips located on the back of the body or coat them with silicone. Less often, water enters the trunk through the ventilation grills behind the sides of the bumper. There are probably no cars where the wires in the trunk harness do not break. Mazda 6 is no exception. The wires break where the harness bends. After this, the electrical components installed in the trunk lid are switched off. The backlight may go out. The power to the trunk lock may be lost, and then the trunk lid will not open. On Mazda 6 sedans and liftbacks, the trunk lock button is built into the central brake light and covered with a rubber cap. When the cap bursts, moisture enters the contact closure of this button. In this case, the button does not work the first time, and can also work randomly. We advise you not to worry about the button and its repair or gluing. It's better to immediately buy a new original one for $33, GS1D 568DXB, or a Chinese equivalent for $15, and you will forget about this problem for many years. Through the burst button cap, as well as through the brake light seal, water gets into the trunk lid. Mazda 6 door stops are not very durable. Their plastic latches wear out after 8 to 12 years of use, and as a result, the doors begin to creak when opened. Original limiters, GS1D 58270E, GS1D 58270 cost $25. Replacement clamps are also available for sale. But in both cases, you will have to remove the door card to replace or service the limiters. The driver and front passenger of the Mazda 6 can hear the creaking of their seats. In some cases, the seats can also swing, well, almost like on a Vaz Classic. In general, during the recall campaign, Mazda engineers corrected this defect, but there are still cars with this problem. The whole point is that the washers that secure it to the slide fall off in the seat lifting mechanism. After this, the bushings of one of the 4 supports of the lifting mechanism pop out of the slide, and the seat falls on its side and begins to swing. Usually today, owners deal with this problem radically. They either weld spring washers to the bushings, or remove the bushings in the lifting mechanism and install bolts with self-locking nuts instead. If an error appears on the instrument panel regarding airbags, then most likely it is due to poor contact in the electrical connector. You need to read the error to find out which airbag the ECU is complaining about. And then bend the contacts in the electrical connector chips. Sometimes the DSC off indicator lights up on the dashboard of a Mazda 6, and at the same time the automatic transmission selector lock does not work well, i.e. it is not possible to immediately move the selector from the parking position. In this case, the problem is the wear of the brake pedal switch, BN7N66490A. It is installed directly above the pedal. It's better to immediately replace it with a new one. It costs only $15, and you will forget about this problem for a long time. When replacing the clutch pedal switch, you may see weld marks or cracks on the clutch pedal bracket. If the base of the bracket is cracked, the pedal warps a little, presses hard and creaks. Even on the Mazda 6, the heated seats sometimes turn off. This usually happens due to the combustion of one of the threads. In this case, creative repair of the heating element by disassembling the seat helps, and if the low fluid level indicator in the windshield washer system does not go off on the Mazda 6 instrument panel, then the sensor float is usually to blame. It just doesn't pop up, so the light stays on all the time. The sensor can be removed by accessing the windshield washer reservoir through the right front fender liner. The sensor is simply pulled out from the bottom of the tank. Then you can disassemble it and clean the float. Craftsmen advise improving its buoyancy. They drill 1 to 2 holes in the plastic float into which foam rubber or foam is inserted. If Mazda starts to hum with its fan motor, don't be surprised. This soar is not so common, but it is known. The hum is caused by friction in the fan bearing, but adding lubricant does not always help eliminate the hum. Unfortunately, you will have to install a new fan, GS1D61B10. The original costs $180, but there are many replacements on sale for $60.